Okay, so let's have a look at this DTI gauge then. To start off with, we have the stand here, and it's adjustable, so there are little screws that you can undo to be able to move it up and down. And we've got another one at the back of the DTI that we can spin around as well. Now this stand is magnetic at the bottom, so at the minute it's on negative and it's very easy to move and come off. If I turn that around so it's on the positive, it fixes quite well onto the metal bench. This measures to 1/100th of a millimetre, so it is very accurate. If you drop it 9 times out of 10 you will damage it. So please be careful with these. There are 2 dials on it. One is a little dial there which indicates millimetres, and another one is the dial on the outside which indicates hundredths of a millimetre. The outside gauge will turn, and that will be important later on. So if I move that plunger, you can see how the gauge spins around. And as you can see, if I set the outer gauge onto 0 and the millimetre gauge is on pretty much 0. Okay, so if I now move this around, and I come right up to the 0 there, you'll see that the smaller dial has gone to 1, so that's a whole 1 millimetre, and I can take it back to 0. So if I just move this gently, that would be 0.1 of a millimetre. If I just take it down to there, that would be 0.09 of a millimetre, 0.08 of a millimetre, 0.06 of a millimetre, 0.01 of a millimetre, 0.2 of a millimetre, 0.21 of a millimetre, 0.25 of a millimetre, 0.9 of a millimetre, 1 millimetre. What to do is to attach the stand onto the McPherson strut leg. Make sure it's relatively secure, just so it won't fall off. Then I need to adjust the DTI to go onto the disc itself. So we want it to be touching the disc, perhaps 2/3 of the way onto the disc, like that is. Now you'll notice on the small dial that you can see a preload there. There's already a couple of millimetres onto it. That doesn't matter. We need to make sure that we have the brake disc fitted well onto the hub, and that there is no play in the wheel bearing. You should have already done that check. Okay, so the next thing is I'm going to need to turn the brake disc until I get the dial gauge onto the lowest point. So as you can see, I'm spinning it around, it's going up higher, and that's about the lowest point. Once I'm at the lowest point, I now need to turn this gauge and get it so that that little needle goes onto the 0. You can then turn the brake disc. You will notice that your gauge goes up and then goes back down. You want to make sure that it returns back to 0. If it doesn't, for instance with this one, perhaps we just didn't have it quite settled. So I'll go to the lowest point again and adjust it to a 0 point. Right, once we know it goes back to 0, there we go. Then we just need to spin it and find the highest point. and that you should find is about 0.06, and it's just a bit over the 0.06, so about 0.065 of a millimetre.